Excellent. Good evening, everybody. How are you? I just need a couple minutes here to make some adjustments to my postings, and then we are going to jump right in to the conversation. I pray that your day has gone well, that you have been able to do some of the things that you desired to do with this day. Um, and I welcome you to close out the day with these conversations. I want to preface what I'm doing tonight with uh, a statement. And the thing that I want to make sure is super clear is I don't profess to be an expert in this area that I am about to uh, spend a good bit of time talking to you about. I don't profess to be an expert in that field. However, um, I am an expert in my opinion. How you doing, sis? I'm an expert on how I think and feel and how I process information. And so that's all I'm going to talk about tonight. Is I'm not going to try to tell you what to think or believe. We're just going to look at some situations. We're going to talk about some news stories and have some conversations that I think is important for us to begin having. And I say begin having because I think that we've had a lot of discussion about how terrible things are. Um, we just need to pray. I'm doing good, sis. I'm doing real good. We just need to pray. We just need to, you know, there's a lot of things that don't actually get around to telling us, like, practically what is it that I should be doing, and then not being afraid to touch on the hard parts of some of the conversations that I think we need to have around some of the topics that we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about, um, primarily, we're going to be talking about shootings. And I was listening to a talk show this morning where they were talking about the shooting in Buffalo, New York, where so many people have died either from their injuries or uh, from the actual incident. Hey, Minister Jason. Hey, Prophet Sonia. Um, and there have been so many things that have happened, and I've heard so much conversation about them, and that the specifics of how things have gone so far are they're mind blowing. And I really thumbs me up if you're ready to jump on. Um, you've got your mic open, so I see you're good. Okay. And so we are. Prophet Sonia is going to be jumping on to uh, take part in this conversation as well. And what I really am wanting to look at is, as I was on my way home this evening, I was just actually started with the conversation this morning. I was listening to talk radio, Larry Favors, I think her name is, and she has some pretty radical stances in some areas. But the conversation that she was having this morning really triggered a thought for me. And the thought was, what, who weaponized this child? because I know legally 18 is old enough for us to deal with some things like an adult. But I remember being 18, and though I had adult freedoms, um, I wasn't grown. If you know what I mean. By definition, there are things that I'm now accountable for because of my age. There are some things that I'm responsible for because of my age, but I really didn't have grown people like res- accountability simply because I had no experience. And so when I thought about an 18-year-old being angry enough, capable enough to do the things that this young man did, it bugged me, and it made me think, if this is an 18-year-old doing any other thing, somebody's asking, who the parents? Boy, who's your mama? Who's your dad? Who are your people? Where are you from? And it made me really begin to question how we process these news stories, because the person who did the shooting, absolutely 100% responsible for the decisions, choices, and actions that they made. He's 18. We would let him join the military. I think in most states you can buy alcohol. Some states, cigarettes, vote. We let 18-year-olds select presidents. We let 18-year-olds do a lot of things. So definitely at 18, definitely accountable for the choices and decisions that he makes. But I'm curious about the journey to being that 18-year-old who's focused enough to do the things that this 18-year-old did. I saw an update of a story that came out on CBS News at about 7:30 Central. And what the story says is, new details have emerged about the suspect in Saturday's mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket, where he's accused of killing 10 people and wounding 3 more. The suspect, who has been accused of committing a racially motivated attack and targeting the area for its high percentage of Black residents, scouted out the supermarket in early March. Okay, I want you to hear that part, because when people start talking about, oh, he's just crazy, maybe irrational, maybe does in fact have some mental health issues, but this man's a predator. This man, this man, and I'm calling him a man for a reason, but this man has, as this story said, he didn't just wake up this morning angry, frustrated about the economy, Joe Biden and this gas, war in the Ukraine, scandals in the church, politics, these Democrats, these Republicans, these abortions. He didn't just wake up this morning frustrated. It says since March, he's been scouting out the supermarket, and he visited, come on, the day before the shooting. Police say 18-year-old Peyton Gendron drove more than 200 miles from his home. So he didn't even live in Jersey. In Buffalo. He doesn't even live in the community. So it's not like he's, a part of the community and seeing the way that things are going and, feels passionately that things need to be changed. He's outraged. These people have come into his community and they're just ruining his community. They're violating our cultural norms. They're changing the way things are going. No, he went to a place where people were minding their Black business, and specifically their Black business. You can call it race carding all you want. He specifically chose a Black community. So it says, according to police, he was dressed in military style camouflage and protective gear, was armed with a semi automatic rifle. Investigators say he also planned to continue his attacks to other places if he was not stopped at the supermarket. The suspect was arrested at the Tops Family Markets where the shooting occurred and was later charged with first-degree murder. They arraigned him on Saturday and he pled not guilty. Despite the fact those are his guns, that was his live stream, he was apprehended in the act of carrying out some things. He's pled not guilty. And what I don't want to do is just talk about this situation because I believe we're going to do a quick look at some sociological terms and discuss this shooting along with others that we've seen. There was a shooting today. I mean, not today. There was another shooting in California at a church. And it looks like a gentleman of Asian descent went in shooting. And this is a church that's apparently the makeup of the church, the cultural or racial makeup of the church. They were Taiwanese. So he's going after clearly people of a particular ethnic group. And so where I want to start is I think in America, because of our freedoms, that from time to time, good evening, prophetess. Before I get into my tirade, thank you for jumping on tonight to share in this conversation. Just on the
You're welcome.
preliminaries of the conversation, are there any initial thoughts that you would like to share with us before I start digging into some information to explain why I feel the way I feel?
We talked about this yesterday a lot before class. Prophetess Katrina and I did talk about this a lot before class last night, and now I can't find the article. But well, actually, her and Trey and I had a conversation about it, and one of the articles I found was on the CNN website, was on
Mm-hmm.
CNN, and it talked about how the young man actually in what was it, 20, either 2019 or 2021, he had made threats at his school,
Mm-hmm.
and they took him to a mental hospital then for evaluation, but then he was no longer being watched. It was like he was just let go, it they dropped the ball, I guess. But in the article that they had, they stated where he first started out on this journey in January of this year by listening to what was being said by Tucker Carlson on his show and some other people that think like him. He had been listening to it, and then in January, after listening to them some more, he really started making a plan. And what they discovered was he had 180 pages of a manifesto at 18. My son is 19 and he don't like to write. I don't know what teenager likes to write. None of them like to write. But he literally sat down and wrote a 180-page manifesto, basically talking about how they were becoming the minority now. And he searched until he found a place, and Buffalo apparently had 78% of blacks. And so that's what led him there. And I'm like, just reading the article, and all of the stuff it was military stuff. And as we were talking yesterday, it came out that They had gun laws that were to keep people like him from even having access to any of this kind of stuff. And we were just going over the different laws that they've changed every time we've had one of these to stop the people, but they still get it. And Trey was making some, my son was making some very good observations and points. And what caught my eye the most was in the article when they talked about how when he came out, he put the gun to his chin, he put the gun to his head. Then he very calmly, they allowed him to calmly put the weapon down, take off his vest that was protecting him, get down on his knees and put his hands behind him. And I'm thinking, now if the situation was reversed, his mother would have been planning a funeral, because there would have been all kind of excuses of why he had been shot. And it was
And
just,
we're having look, and I'm jumping in because we're having difficult conversations tonight. You say if it were reversed, what you mean?
if it was reversed and it was a 18-year-old black young man that had shot a bunch of white people, there wouldn't have been him trying to give up peacefully and all of that. You just would have shot him coming out the door. I personally feel that's what I personally feel because of the things that have happened in the past. I also personally feel if it had been black on black crime, it would have been the same result. You would have just shot him. It wouldn't have mattered. There wouldn't have been any peaceful resolve to it. But here, you let this person who came in on a Friday night and did his final recon of the area and the situation and the store so that he would be ready to come in with all of his military guard. And it's like, okay, we're still a separate society, or we still have separate judicial, however you want to say it. We're handled differently. You all have handled this young man with kid gloves, but you wouldn't have handled, I don't see where you would have handled the same young man had he been black with kid gloves. I just don't see that. I don't see it. Maybe somebody else can see it, but I don't see that because your track record concerning us shows me y'all just shoot to kill us. We don't get an option of being able to peacefully surrender. You just shoot us outright. You just kill us outright. And then come up with the excuses to back up what you've done. And it's like, wow. So, when I looked at him, wasn't a scratch on him, wasn't no, what, nothing. And I'm like, after I read the article, I'm like, oh, so y'all know how to take some people in without scratches, without looking like they've been through a third war. If you don't shoot to kill them, but other people, they just look like they just done had a fight with a famous boxer or something and just done got beat down. But this young man has nothing, just nothing. And it's like, wow. On the flip side of that, I will commend the commissioner for calling it what it was, that it was a hate crime. Um, you know, he was very open and honest about what it was, and the prosecutor for how they're going to prosecute him. I commend them on the fact that they found a judge that was up at night willing to come into the courthouse to take him straight down to the court to prosecute him and give him the charges that he's going to have to face. I do commend them for that. I do. It's not all, I'm not going to just stay on the bad side. I am going to commend them for that because I was surprised that they even done that. But again, we are in a time where we have got to be prayerful. We got to be praying, especially if you are the body of Christ. You need to be in the word. You need to be getting in God's presence and dwelling there. There needs to be discernment so that when the things are happening, I'm not going to say some of us, it may not surprise us, and we're able. For me, it was a shock um at what happened, but I think I was more shocked at the fact, wow, y'all know how to, bring people in peacefully that don't look like me, that are not black. But on the other hand, I know what the word says about us living in the end times. And it's not going to get better. It's just going to keep going because the Bible must fulfill itself. So we have to be in a place to where we're able to pray. We're able to have, as it says here, the difficult conversations. After we have them, then we must have a plan and we must put that plan to action. It's like the post that I said over the weekend. Know your assignment and act accordingly. We all have assignments, and when you know them and you act accordingly, God begins to move. And I'm not gonna be with y'all long tonight because I got to get some rest. But I wanted to come on and support my sister, my prophetess Tracy, because she's a support to me as well, and it is a good conversation. But that's all I got right now.
Okay. Thank you very much. And you touched on some topics that I'm going to agree with, some I'm going to push back on. And because I know you have to go, I'm going to push back on the ones while you're here with me. And it's not a pushback and I disagree with you. It's a pushback to further the difficult conversations. And anytime you feel uncomfortable about going into a space, please, don't. But there's some things that I think we really have to parse out and really look at. Like, history has us in a really dysfunctional place because unfortunately when we're looking at situations like this one, we find ourselves in a situation of having to compare how perfectly innocent, unarmed Black people were treated worse than criminals caught in the act.
Yep.
And unfortunately, in situations like this, we are forced to say, man, why can't Black people who have been assumed to be criminals be treated in a similar way to those to white people who've been caught in the act of committing a crime? And this isn't bash white people night, don't get me wrong, because
No, it's not.
the place I'm going to push back is they're critically aware of how to arrest us without killing us, because they managed to arrest the DC sniper. And just thinking of people who Black people who are responsible for mass situations.
Mm-hmm.
The DC sniper was more of a serial situation than a
Right.
mass particular shooting. And they
Right.
apprehended him and brought him in, and he was able to walk through the justice system and be found guilty and charged and go to jail and pay the penalty for his crime. The young man who, or I think he was an older man, I may be generous calling him a young man, but the young man who just committed the shooting in New York in the subway,
Mm.
who called and turned himself in. It
Yes.
was funny. The police news conference was hilarious to me because there was this marching and setup. Like, I hadn't followed the story all day to see and know the details. So I'm waiting and I'm excited. I'm ready to cheer on the NYPD for their, crack police work. How quickly they've apprehended this person who it seems like there was just no way to find him, only to find out the man called the police on himself. So I was a bit amused by that whole thing. However,
I was too.
That black man as well, who committed a mass event, was properly apprehended
Yeah, he
without
was.
being killed
That's
and
true.
brought in.
That's
So,
true.
where I want us, because it's a whole nother conversation about how innocent, unarmed black men are being killed. That's a whole separate conversation that's going to be a difficult conversation by itself. Because I
That's
have no
true.
doubt, not tapping into any kind of anointing or anything, I have no doubt that we'll have another incident where that's going to become relevant and we'll be able
Yeah.
to have that conversation. As a matter of fact, I think there's one actually that I've got in my pocket somewhere that I need to go in and get myself a little more up on the details of it before we have that difficult conversation. So there's going to be space to have that conversation on police crimes and how we handle the shootings of unarmed black people, because we got to bring in, we got to look at and handle Sandra Bland, who wasn't shot, but something
Supposedly.
fishy this, you know what I'm
Like,
saying.
yeah, she supposedly
um,
committed
yeah,
suicide. Really?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Breonna Taylor,
In the bed
uh,
sleep.
yeah, and so many others. I'm thinking of the young lady who was shot through her window. I'm thinking of the
Oh
young
yes.
girl this last year who, she's at the mall with her mama trying on clothes. Doesn't have anything to do
Yes.
with that have gone on, and she ends
Arlington.
up being the victim of police shooting. And it's like the details of, wait, what happened with that case? Why were they shooting at a mall? Were they shooting because they were being shot at? I mean, it's those kind of things. And so, because one of the things that I want to look at, and I want to make sure that folks are clear on, I am not anti-gun,
I'm
and
not
I
either.
don't believe in these mass shootings situations that the gun is the problem, because there's so many people that have guns. There's so many people that have guns, and they never do anything with those guns. But there is a subculture that's developing, and I call them our shooter culture. And when we think about, like, what is culture? When we think about what culture is, a definition that I was able to find on what is culture tells us that culture, in its broadest sense, it's cultivated behavior. It's the totality of a people's learned, accumulated experience, which is socially transmitted, or more briefly, behavior through social learning. And it really triggered me from what I had had on my heart earlier in the day. It's like, who's responsible? Somebody's responsible for triggering these shootings. Some teaching, some culture, some what. And I think that there's a lot of things that come into play, because you do have the media. We can't
Yes.
say Tucker Carlson, because there's millions of people that watch Tucker Carlson every day and they don't shoot anybody. So, what is it about these people who do all seem to be ascribing to either extremely conservative, right wing political perspectives, or in the case of the black man in New York with the subway shooting, extreme left ideals.
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, we can't put it on Tucker, but we can, because the media plays a major role in turning these bad behaviors into a culture, in creating the mindset that takes an 18-year-old young man who has access to guns, some mental or behavioral issues, some racist ideologies, some particular grounding. He's learned that some way. And what's so crazy about it is the reason it's a culture, I believe, is you look at there's some things that have been pretty similar with these kind of killings. He's got what almost 200 pages written material of a manifesto.
Yes.
Well,
Called itself
I
a
remember,
pastor.
yeah, I remember back in the day, the Unabomber used to send
Yeah.
letters
Yes.
explaining why he was doing what he was doing.
Yes, he did.
Um, if I remember correctly, like the Son of Sam killer was leaving clues and giving
Yeah.
information and
Yes.
and so it seems to be that's an aspect of its shared learned behavior that they're picking up from somewhere. And so you've got that shared behavior. There's a history of threats. This young man had a history of making threats. But of course, the decision makers said, ain't nothing wrong with him. He's okay. Let him go. Let him go home.
Yep.
Why? If he's got this history of why is this young man walking the streets? Is it because we deal with people of a certain race and a certain class differently than we do others?
Hmm.
Possibly so. And so, oh, teenagers, they're angsty. They're have we not had enough school shootings by kids with histories of issues
I
to
would think
say
so.
that a kid who appears to have some mental illness issues, along with making threats to do violence in a way that isn't unheard of, that's something that should warrant, like, it's frustrating to me to hear, oh yeah, we were talking to him because we thought he might be a problem. But nah, all is well. I believe the suspect in the last school shooting, that was the case. Mom and dad had been
Yep.
called to the school.
Yes.
Mom and
Yes.
dad knew the little boy had stolen their gun.
Yes.
But while the police are talking to the parents, mom and dad texting the kid, hey, don't do it.
Come on now.
And so we can't say these are surprise behaviors. They're learned behaviors that have been observed, and they're definitely of concern to somebody at some level. But somehow or the other, there seems to be these continued patterns of these young people not ending up, as a part of special programs, not ending up. I haven't looked at the data on, kids in urban communities that appear to be threatening, and the different programs and things that happen with them and the services that they continue to receive, and how the state and the government and the school systems oppressively get involved in those families because the child has some questionable behaviors.
Yeah, they did. They
Yeah.
swept it under the rug.
And then, right. And then you've got the final piece where not only has he learned behavior, but he's also teaching. This shooter was live streaming what he did on a gaming app, on a gaming app, Twitch. He's live streaming
Yes.
as he's murdering people.
Yes. And that was the other thing too, was because I asked her, I said that's a military helmet he had on. I'm like,
Mhm.
where could he? And she was like, on the black market. She said, because you can't just order it and go in your local store, she said, and get it. Although people are able to get it because hunters and stuff use it. She said, it's still not the grade that we have because nobody can really get that grade that we have unless they go to the black market. But it doesn't have all the technology. She said, but yeah, She said it's out there, and her thing was, who dropped the ball? Even the police were involved in watching him and drop the ball. And it's like, how do you drop the ball on this? This young man has threatened people at his school. Nobody in particular, it was the school. He threatened them. You all were called in and you took him from the school to the hospital. That was just a year ago when he was 17. Here we are a year later and nobody's watching him. Nobody's watching him. Nobody is watching him. And I guess I need to clarify in what I'm saying by Tucker Carlson. I'm not blaming him, but what I'm saying is the young man watched all those people and got
Yes. Yeah.
radicalized. And he
Exactly.
called himself a fascist and all this
Yes.
other stuff in this manifesto. He was with what, I don't know which version of the, I don't know if it was of white supremacy, but he talked about that in the
Hmm.
manifesto. And what I'm saying is what she is saying. All of that stuff added together gives an issue, but we can't really start here. Like we talked about yesterday, you got to take it all the way back to Columbine when those boys were in the parents' garage building bombs and making all this other stuff, and y'all ain't saying nothing. Your 17 and 16-year-old, however old they were then, are in your garage building bombs and doing all this shady stuff, and y'all, no clue, nothing is
Yeah.
suspicious to you.
It's just boys being boys.
Yes,
And
and then what
we
you
can talk
find
about
out is,
toxic. Yes.
yeah. And then what happens is your theory of boys being boys turn into they have terrorized their school and have shot up all these people. But I said when that happened, then I said that's only the beginning. We are just now getting started with what is going to be happening in these schools. That is just the beginning. And I'm thinking, didn't none of y'all have a clue? You are in an area where it's 100 degrees and they got these long black coats on like they in the Matrix. Something should have been a clue to you that there is an issue here. But again, the ball was dropped. And you have people hiding under desks, just hiding wherever they could, calling their parents in the midst of all this. I can't imagine being a parent and you hearing these automatic guns going off. And they're not saying, it was just wild. Because they were asking people to stand up, and if you believed in Jesus, they were shooting you. Then they'd ask other kind of crazy questions, and then they would shoot you. It was just crazy. So when you really think about it, it goes all the way back to Columbine. How these kids living in your house get access to all this stuff that they did to do what they did. And like you said, you think they're boys just being boys. No, I got a boy. My boy wasn't a boy like that. And I know other people that have boys and their boys weren't boys like that. It's learned behavior.
Oh,
Kids are not born to be racist. Kids are innocent when they come. They learn from us. They learn from us. We indoctrinate them with whatever our views are. So this was learned behavior. This ain't something he came here with. No, he has learned this. And if he didn't learn it from you as parents, then he's learned it somewhere. Because again, the boy wrote 180 page, and then he had the common sense to go and do recon in March and then come back the day before to get more intel and do more recon to make sure he could do what he wanted to do. I want to know where he spent the night at. Because at most hotels, you got to be a certain age. Where did he spend the night? Who? I'm just saying.
And that's that. Those are the questions, and those are the kinds of conversations. And again, I know you already see it with the not guilty plea. We already know that what's going to end up happening is a very heavy leaning on mental health issues. I you know what's coming, and not on what's this child been taught. Because see, leaning on the mental health issues alone takes the weight off of his community having to understand how language weaponizes, how the political mantras weaponize. And I'm not against political and political and uh, conspiracy theories and that kind of thing. I think that some understanding that everything isn't as it seems is healthy, actually. But at what place within our families, within our communities, within our cultures, do we start to say, hold on, wait a minute now, that's a little too far. You've gone a little too far, TV. You've gone a little too far off the deep end. If you're at the place where you're preparing yourself militarily at 18.
18.
He didn't have a credit card to purchase these things. He's going through somebody's accounts.
That was one of my. That was something we talked about yesterday too. Where
As
you
you
get the
said,
money from?
yeah, as an 18-year-old, like you said, where did he spend the night? Who did he stay with? And granted, I didn't have my eyes on my child 24 hours a day at 18. You shouldn't have to. Not normal.
No.
But this child taking trips that long, I mean, he wasn't supposed to be at school. He wasn't supposed to be at work. He wasn't supposed to be somewhere.
The article that they shared was he worked somewhere for 4 months and then he was gone. He just didn't show up. The neighbors say he was real quiet, kept to
Yeah.
himself. And I was like, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a child that's quiet and keeps to himself. And as a mother, I know when something ain't right.
And
I
understand.
know it.
Yep. And understand again, those are the kinds of things that will allow us to say there was nothing that we could have done because he was just a quiet little boy, and we had no idea that he was going to turn into a mass shooter. Lies you tell.
That's what I say.
Lies you tell. Oh yeah, there were clear indications and signs. Because again, he's disappearing for hours on end and you don't have a clue where he is.
Not a clue.
It takes a good bit of time to drive 200 miles.
I thought
Didn't,
about that too.
but
What?
then to like go to be out of pocket at 18 for that long,
And you
not
don't have no,
once, yeah, not once, multiple times. The story said he came up in March and checked it out.
and you didn't have a problem.
And this
Someone
boy,
right.
yeah, he just out of pocket for these huge hours of time, and you don't know anything. Your son who's been talked to about making threats, your son
Yeah.
who's ordering military gear, your son who, no, what we're not going to do in this situation is be able to say we just don't know where he came from. He's an anomaly. We
Uh-uh.
we don't know, where this child came from. We there was nothing that could have been done. No, there
No.
we got to quit acting like there isn't a shooter subculture, like there isn't some markers and indicators that we can be looking at and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a grounds and atmosphere out of which you produce this kind of a result, this kind of a person, because it's as you said, kids aren't born racist. Kids learn racism. And it's not that kids don't see color. They're human beings. They definitely see color. There's a little baby at our church, and she's so funny because she's around a lot of black people. She's around white people as well. Her family's white, and she's around a lot of black people because they're in the black community. But I'll sometimes she'll come over and she's sitting next to me and she'll rub on my hand. And she's not trying to soothe me or calm me down. She's learning, hold on, wait a minute. That skin's a different color than mine. Let me see if it feels different than mine. She's learning about the people around her. But where do people attach the feelings that they have about those people? Well, she's having interactions, meaningful interactions with people of various races, various backgrounds. So she's going to have a good bit of understanding that, oh, okay, you know what? People are different, but people are people. And so in this instance, you've got a young man who's from an extremely racially white area who specifically goes to a black area. He's dealing in what sociologists would call, again, because what I'm attacking is we don't know where he came from. We don't know why these shootings keep happening. It's just puzzling. Oh, it's the guns. We got to do away with the guns. No, there should have been a couple more guns in that store because somebody should have applied somebody in most neighborhoods would have been packing. And they may not have, but he'd have sure taken a hit or two. But
Yeah.
what you're dealing with
Mhm.
many times with these kinds of shootings is cultural ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the belief that one's own culture is superior to other cultures. It's a form of reductionism that reduces the other people's life is a distorted version. It's not as good as mine. It's not as wholesome as mine. See, if your culture was like my culture, then I wouldn't, then you're my problem. You're the reason that we're having these challenges. They said things like he believed in like a replacement theory that people of other races
Yes.
trying to replace them.
Yes.
Okay, well, so why? I mean, it has to be that somewhere along the way you've been taught that people who are different are less than, and those people are coming in and getting things that you would have if they weren't here. Or you're believing that what you have has been tainted or distorted
Mm-hmm.
by these people from this other culture, in effect making those people of that older culture your enemy. Again, we're attacking, we don't know where these kinds of killings come from. This isn't
Right.
America. And I say, yeah, this is America. This is
This is America.
absolutely America,
It's America.
because what's been really interesting is over the last year, the conversations about critical race theory and the success that some elected officials, politicians, and influential people in the world have had. There was a man, I can't think of his name, but he set out on a plan. And what he said was anytime race was involved or racial matters were involved, it was going to be his goal to attach that to critical race theory. So much so that anytime people heard the words critical race theory, they would in their minds have a negative connotation. And he knew that by that, he'd be able to move people towards his perspective. Well, if
Wow.
you can use that for your good, what makes you think that you can't also create the atmosphere, create the environment where these school shooters are being built? So understand that while you're creating activists and people that are going to go to meetings and people that are going to do, dangerous things like vote, yes, you're weaponizing those people as well.
Yes, you are.
You also have to realize that you're also weaponizing the kid with some issues who's been trained to be racist, who's
Yes, they
building
have.
up a stockpile of military equipment and weapons, who's
Hmm.
free to move around as he sees fit because parents clearly ain't checking for where he is and what he's doing.
Not at all.
And what have we done? We created a shooter.
Created a whole mess. And nobody wants this gonna be my final comment so I can get off and get into bed. Is a good conversation, but nobody wants to accept their responsibility or their part in this. Um, I was always taught that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community for our young people. And as parents, you're part of that community. As teachers, if you see something that's not like real right with this child and this child is acting out of character, you're part of that community. If you the neighborhood grocer and you see this child all the time and all of a sudden this child has just flipped what they're doing, you're part of that community. But we live in such a society now, nobody wants to touch anything. Why? Because as parents, we get so offended. Well, you ain't gonna talk to my child like that, and you ain't gonna say that to my son. But then you the first one crying, saying, well, didn't nobody help because of you. You didn't want nobody to say nothing to Johnny. Johnny been, I don't know, acting out of control for years, and people won't say anything to you because can't say nothing to little Johnny mama because they go real crazy and she cuss you out and she talk all about you because her child ain't gonna do that. You are not with your child 24/7 because I wasn't with mine 24/7. The school saw my child the majority of the day, 5 days a week. They're gonna know something. They're gonna notice something. But even as parents, you should still be able to notice when there's something out of character for your child. That goes both ways. Even when their mental is not right and they got suicidal thoughts going on in their mind. There is something that should trigger you as a parent. Hmm. Yeah, my child is normally quiet, but you too quiet now. You too quiet. Because in my house, because I know what my child likes to do and the things he be watching down there, the kung fu, and I guess he be trying to do all that kung fu junk. I don't know. But if he's too quiet, I start saying something until I hear something and get an answer. Why? Because you too quiet. So what's going on that you are too quiet if you not sleep? But as parents, and I'm not jumping on parents, I'm just saying we're not aware as we need to be. We're not aware as we need to be. Because believe it or not, that social media, those videos, those games, and peer pressure have more control at times or more of a pull on our children than we do. I'm just saying. And I'm sure it was the same when I was coming up for whatever was going on during my time when I was growing up. But things are so different now. You know, when people start talking about how you can take a computer and make a gun, I never heard of that in all my life. You take a computer, make a gun, and you can't trace it, but it really shoots bullets. I'm like, what in the world? But the Bible talks about weaker and wiser. And my mother used to always say that. And she was talking about our generation. But I'm like, okay, yeah, that's true about our generation too. But I'm like, I really see that scripture now in this generation, in this time. I see it. They are so wise in so many electronical things that they can do, but they're so weak in so many other areas. Are we paying attention? Are we paying attention to the scriptures? Are we paying attention to them being fulfilled? And I know we talking about the shooting, but to me they tie together because the Bible is fulfilling itself, and some of us we just unaware. We're just I can hear the old person saying unawares, putting that S on it. But I'm just saying we're unaware. We're not paying attention to what is exactly right in front of our faces of, hey, the Bible speaks to this. And I know we don't like to read the book of Revelation, but you need to read it and ask God to help you get an understanding and a clarity of it because prophecy is being fulfilled every day. It has always been it has always been being fulfilled every day, but it's more so now than ever. Why? Because God is coming. His return is soon. And the enemy know when his time is up. He know he ain't got long. So while we playing games with him, he's not playing games. He playing for keeps. And if he can't get you, the parent or the adult, what is he going for? I'm going for the generation that's behind. I'm going for the millennials. I'm going for that generation. And we have to be the ones, just like somebody prayed for us, we got to be praying for them. And so I have enjoyed the conversation with my sister. Any other time I would hang with her. But we have just got back into town, and I think I've been walking in the fog all day. So I probably should go and lay down so that I am ready to go. But I appreciate the opportunity to be on here with her. And whenever she does part two, I will definitely come back and discuss some more because they are hard conversations that the church doesn't want to have, and we can't sweep it under the rug. We can't overlook it. We can't act like it's not here because it's here and it's not going anywhere. It's just not. And we got to accept that. And we got to learn how to be able to have the conversations and then go to the steps of what do we do now? What is our journey? What is our goal? What is our strategy, our plan, our vision, however you want to say it? What do we need to do now? So love you, sis. And I will catch the rest of it, the end of it tomorrow, during my day. So bye everybody.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. And before you completely shut down for the evening, can you throw a link in to the 90-minute mental health reset? Because those kinds of conversations that you and Rachel have there are going to be key as we're going through these difficult conversations because we're not taking care of our mentals at all. I won't say we're not, and I won't say at all. because I know more people now that are involving themselves in therapy than ever before. I know more people who are praying over their mental health now more than ever. But
I
we've
am one
got
of those
to
people.
begin practicing the things that we know help with improving mental health. And you all have very key conversations in that atmosphere. So I want to reference that for people, that if you're not quite sure where to start in the conversations with your family members, your children's teachers, your children, your family, they have very no nonsense, cut to it conversations that aren't over spiritualized. Everything's not a devil. Some things are conditions. Some things are decisions. And we've got to be having those conversations where this is concerned, because what happens in many of these instances is all of those things play together. So we're in a space and time right now where there is a murderous spirit, I believe, operating in our land, in the world, period. And that, coupled with our hands off approach when it comes to seeing troublesome behavior in our children, in our families, in our loved ones, in the people we go to work with, in the people that we go to school with, in the we've become a very I'm gonna mind my business world, until tragedies such as this strike, and then everybody's got a little something to say, and everybody knows the answer. Well, we need to pray. Well, we need to fast. Well, we need to change. Well, we need to. And so, how do we get around to doing it if we won't have the honest, looking it in the face conversation that's necessary for these moments? And so, I'm going to close out with saying I absolutely believe that these mass shooter events type situations are not one offs. This isn't some individual who just went rogue, but that this is a young man that cultural determinism has come into play. And what cultural determinism says is the position that the ideas, meanings, beliefs, and values people learn as members of society determines how their character is shaped. It determines what their base nature is. And so, unless something like a compelling experience with religion, where, and we hear the testimonies all the time, I came to Christ and my life changed. I used to be this and now I'm that. We talked last night on Christ is Our Culture about that being transplanted from the old man to the new. That when you come into contact with the truth, the way, and the light, when you come into knowledge of Christ and you accept Him as your Savior, your life changes and you are different. And so, in those instances, you're able to actually be counterculture, and you're actually operating in a way that's different than the things that you've learned. But at our base, on our own, most people, I won't say that it's true for every single body, because in every culture you will find those anomalies, those what is it, a priori, ain't nobody like that. You'll find those things, but overwhelmingly, and I think that we have enough episodes of these type of shootings to be able to say that there is a type and a kind that we can see and know that that behavior left unchecked is going to result in some very dangerous behavior, because I believe that people are what they learn. That very rarely are people just all of a sudden caught up in the rapture, caught up in the moment, in the heat of the moment, doing a lot of very heinous things, but that we learn behaviors. And I think that if we would really get down to something a little more, where we're teaching people I don't like the word tolerance because Christians are so often told that we're not tolerant, and understanding that to anyone who holds passionately to the tenets of their religion, that they're going to be intolerant unless you're a part of the, all roads lead to God school of thought. You can get there any kind of way. But what cultural relativism is cultural relativism says that different cultural groups think, feel, and act differently. There's no scientific standard, though, for considering one group as intrinsically superior or inferior to another. Because we tend to get more into that ethnocentrism, the way that I was raised is the right way for things to be done. The way that my granny taught me, the way that we do things in the Black community, the way they do things in the white community. Well, those Hispanic cultures. Well, those Asian people. There's no standard for considering one group as intrinsically superior or inferior to another. You are where you are because of the behaviors that you've learned. Your race didn't shape the way that you are, but as a result of your race, it's more likely that you were coupled with people who were of a similar ethnicity. Again, here we go. Race is understood by most people as a mixture of physical, behavioral, or cultural attributes. So, because of your race, it is most likely that you're around people who share your ethnicity, which means ethnicity recognizes differences between people mostly on the basis of language and shared culture. It's more likely that your ethnicity is going to, it's understood as what we acquire along the way. It can even be self-ascribed, but it's based on factors like where you live, or the shared cultural norms and values. Those kind of things are going to shape your thinking. But what we have to heal from is that idea that your race does it wrong, my race does it right, your culture does it wrong, my culture does it right. Because that's the place that makes it make sense to shoot someone and presume their guilt or innocence based on what they look like, what they're dressed in, not what they're actually doing. But you predetermine what that person's outcome deserves to be based on what they look like. For instance, there was a story some few years ago. A young man with a mental health challenge was in the street, and one of his counselors was out attempting to get him resituated. And somebody somewhere along the way ends up introducing the police to the situation. The therapist is there. He's got his hands up. He's explaining the young man, has some developmental issues, but he's just playing with toys. We're doing what we can to get him moved. Nobody's in danger. There's nothing to see here. Somehow or the other, despite this man's hands being up and him being in a surrendered position, I want to say the man was on the ground. That man still ended up getting shot. And when he asked the police officer, "Man, why'd you shoot me?" And the guy's like, "I don't know." But somewhere in his thinker, did he shoot that man because of his race? I don't know. But did he end up shooting this man because of some value or lack of value that he saw attached to the person on the ground? Absolutely, without question, it happened. So Here's where it gets muddy for me though, is it happens on all sides. It happens on all sides. And I started out this conversation with exposing the just like the dysfunctional thinking that these kind of situations put us in, because so very often when we see these stories and we're triggered in our thinking one way or another about how the person was handled. Dylan Roof again shoots all those people in that church in South Carolina. And when he gets to the police station, they're feeding him from a fast food restaurant because he was hungry. Never mind, we know he just killed all these people. But he's taken into custody, handled well, lives to tell the story. Fortunately, just recently, his conviction and sentencing was upheld. And then we have this situation where this young man is live streaming his crime, and he's taken into custody. And so we many times find ourselves asking questions like, well, um, why was the Mike Brown, why did the Mike Brown situation go the way that it went? Why did the George Floyd situation go the way that it went? Why did all of these different encounters between the authorities and these Black people who may have committed a crime, may not have, why is it coming out differently in their situations? And what you find is in those stories, we're comparing innocent or presumed innocent Black people and comparing them to how a white person who was found in the act of committing their crime, we're comparing how those two were treated. And it's unfortunate that that's where we are. And so we're going to keep having these difficult conversations because the time is beyond, the time is past for us to have them. We're going to keep talking about these difficult conversations and pointing out the dysfunctions and how we're moving forward, and understand we know prayer is the answer. But what do we do when we get done praying? As prophetess Song said, what? Okay, we got that. So now what do we do differently? What do we do differently? How do we start today making sure? I don't know the young man's name. I don't really at this point believe his name is as significant as what he's done. But how do we make sure that what happened in Buffalo doesn't happen again? Or we can't. People do what people do. No, 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 no. We've had enough examples of this to be able to know that there's a place that these mass shooters are created. There's a way, there's a culture, there's a way that these people are shaped. And I'm not talking black, white, because again, we talked about the DC sniper. We talked about the gentleman involved in the Brooklyn shooting in the subway. We talked about the shooting in California. That gentleman was Asian. So, what is it? How are we creating these things that are happening so more frequently? See, it was easier to say when every couple years or so there was an event. In America, we're experiencing these mass shooting, mass casualty events very frequently. So something's changed. So when we're having these difficult conversations, we're going to talk about the role the media played. Yeah, we can't totally blame a Tucker Carlson because, again, millions of people watch him and they don't shoot or kill anybody. But how does that rhetoric play into creating criminals? How does those types of conversations, those types of behaviors, how are we teaching people to be radicalized? How are we teaching people to be weaponized? Are we overstating things? Are things being discussed in such a way in the media? But I'm not going to put it all on the media. What's the conversation that's being had around your dinner table? If, oh, wait, I know families don't eat around the dinner table anymore. This 18-year-old taking road trips, casing the store on multiple occasions. It said he's visited the store. How's this 18-year-old unchecked like that? Ordering military type equipment, coming into ownership of military type guns. You can't tell me that there were no conversations in his household that led him to thinking or feeling the way that he did. And if it wasn't conversations in the household, what was he exposed to or allowed to be exposed to that weaponized this young man and turned him from an angsty teenager? Y'all know every teenager got a bad attitude. I had a bad attitude when I was a teenager. You had a bad attitude when you were a teenager. I may not have even known you as a teenager, but I know when you were a teenager, you had an attitude problem. When you were a teenager, you probably rebelled a little bit against authority. When you were a teenager, you probably thought you had all the answers, but you didn't shoot up a school. You didn't go into a grocery store in another community and shoot it up because the people look different for you from you. I know many people that are dealing with mental health challenges. I battle anxiety myself. I battle attention deficit issues myself. But my mental health issues aren't leading me to commit some of the acts that we're seeing. So we can't blame it on mental health. It's not one thing, but it is learned behavior. It is created behavior. And we're not going to get to the root of it until we just like unpack these difficult conversations and have them. So I hope that this conversation leads you to have conversations where you can get into conversations with your children, get into conversations with your loved ones, so you can talk out loud about the things that may be brewing in your heart or brewing in your head. And it's got you thinking a certain kind of way. And maybe you just need to hear it from a different perspective. Maybe you need to hear it from someone who is of a different race, someone who is of a different ethnicity, someone who is of a different culture, someone who is of a different age group. So many times we're locked into places and spaces where people believe just like we believe everybody's a Christian in my circle. You know, everybody's over 50 in my circle. Everybody, shares lineages because I only really hang out with my family. Sometimes maybe we need to branch out and have some conversations outside of our normal circles that help us get to those things that we really need to talk about so that we can make sure that we're not passing on and teaching bad behaviors, that we're not teaching bad mindsets, that we're not building bigots, that we're not building racists, that we're not creating gunmen, that we're not weaponizing our young people. That's all. So this was difficult conversation number one. As I've already pinpointed, we're going to have some more because we do need to talk about gun violence. Again, I'm not anti-gun, but we do need to look at some of the statistics where guns are concerned, because just a preliminary quick Google search brought up some things that were alarming. Um, we've also got the news stories, the recent news stories about um, Roe versus Wade and the possibilities of that law being overturned. I want to recommend to everybody a podcast called The Holy Post. They have such really good conversations there. And listening to that helped me be able to verbalize where I stand on some of those issues. So stay tuned, because these Monday night difficult conversations may become a thing. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe event driven rather than a set day, but we'll talk about it at a later time. Thank you all who've been in the chat or just viewing or passing through. Thank you for stopping in and spending a little time with us. It's getting late, so I am going to bed. Have a peaceful night. Um, rest well. Continue to keep those families affected by gun violence everywhere, um, but especially those people involved in those shootings who are going to have to continue to live and relive the loss of their loved ones as these stories unfold. Um, Pray for your community, but get active in your community. Pray for our young people, but get active in the lives of our young people. This is my closing. Just recently, speaking of the Holy Post, Phil Vischer mentioned a study that he looked at recently that showed that children who are acknowledged by the adults in their life tend to have a better quality of life. Children who feel seen. And I know for me as a child who felt in the way because of different things, but that's another difficult conversation for another night. But what they talked about, what the study revealed to him, and I'm going to see, he gave the source. I want to look at that when we do talk about our young people. One of the best factors that indicated a child's ability to feel like they belong was when the adults acknowledged them by name. So I want to challenge you this week. Don't be weird and overstep your boundaries. Teenagers don't want to talk to us anyway. But be purposeful about participating in the lives of the people around you. Be purposeful about saying something if you see something in a friend or a loved one. Because guess what? If they're really going through, now, if they're not going through anything and you tell them, hey, I'm worried about you because I don't want you to become an active shooter, that might set off some things. But if they are, in fact, going through something, they'll appreciate your care and concern. So, as we always close out the check in, check on your people. But I want to challenge you this week to be purposeful about entering into the space of the young people around you. And where you see something, say something. Where you see something, ask a question. Where you see something, show concern and but with compassion. Because as Prophet Sonia says, we can see with this generation that wiser but weaker thing playing out. The problem is, I think we're their weakness. I think we haven't been there for them in ways that uh, we were cared for in other generations. So that's all I have to say. I'm gone. It's been a blessing. It's been fun. Have a good night, and I will talk to you later. Bye.